good, thank you.
Family, all right?
Yes. I didn't turn my.
No. What happened?
You can give me my.
What happened? One of the little kids was sitting.
Yep, you do it. No. I might say one thing, or you were going to say one thing about like spring. Perfect. Question. Zach Klein is here, so you recognize him?
Yes, I would recognize him.
You never got a confirmation. No?
I would recognize him. I do not see him. I don't know his name.
Neither one. Okay.
I know we have Hannah Stockton's family.
Terrific.
We just were talking about how we don't know if Zach's fine family is coming.
Okay, so
And yes,
I haven't lit candles yet with people here, so I presume I'll let them take the lead and I'll just sit.
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
and like if they look confused, you can show them what to do as the expert.
Okay. I've done 3 or 4 times on the camera.
Definitely are experts.
How are you?
Oh, good.
All right?
Just like even event-wise leading up to the end of the summer, you know, like honoring them, but of course, like sharing about a lot of my Shabbat Evening Service. It's going to be great, and also like I have a lot to do.
In preparation.
Yeah, and on top of the sort of like people are moving and coming, and like, you know. I know, and I happen to know both of them really well, so I'm very happy about that. Yeah. I've never worked with them, but I presume it will be Sasha and Rebecca, and I know her from years ago, song leading at Happy Shira.
Really?
Camp song leading. I don't know how much she's still doing that, but
I
yeah.
know she does.
Some, okay. That'd be great. So she can make it to us. Without using like a heat Oh, yes, that's the first thing. I recognize you without the like, electric guitar.
That's the other day.
Oh, the other Danny Bernstein? Okay.
Guitar on the non-famous one. He's athletic and talented.
Now you have to forgive me for forgetting all the meetings stuff.
Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Welcome. I'm Rabbi Jonathan Blake. This is Cantor Danielle Rodnizky. Warren Haber, our temple president, joins us on the bima, and making some beautiful music tonight, lifting our spirits, will be Madeline Rubenstein at the piano, Jerome Morris on percussion, and Idan Sandhaus on flute. And we want to wish Shabbat Shalom to you, our in-person congregation, and because we are also live streaming, to all who are sharing in this Shabbat on our temple website, YouTube, and Facebook. We see you. Shabbat Shalom, and it's meaningful to know that you're with us. I don't know about you, but every time I go outside, it feels like spring is trying so hard. It's trying so hard, but it's up against so much. It's like the chill that won't leave. I don't know about you, but maybe you feel like spring. Like there's a part of you that wants to blossom forth, but we've been in this dark, chilly place for such a long time that it just can't quite break through. So tonight, as we do every Shabbat, we're going to harness all of the spiritual energy that we as a congregation can create. We're going to bring our human light and our human warmth, the warmth of the neshama, the soul, and allow the spring within to shine from without. To help us do that, we're going to invite forward Hannah Stockton and her sister Abby and her mom and dad. Hannah will be celebrating bat mitzvah on our bima tomorrow morning. And we're so proud of you and your family, and we would love to ask you to kindle the lights for Shabbat. Please come forward at this time. One set of candles. Okay. Just light one set of candles.
Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahalik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen. And now we continue with Kabbalat Shabbat, the section of Psalms that helps us warm ourselves up and prepare ourselves to welcome the Shabbat bride when we get to Lecha Dodi. And as Rabbi Blake said, the springtime is trying so hard. And one of the special texts that we read in the spring, especially during Pesach, but also now, is Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, this beautiful love poetry that mirrors the relationship between God and the Jewish people. Dodi li, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. We join together on page 129.
Dodi li vani lo haroeh bashoshanim. Dodi
לקראת כלה פני שבת מקבלה לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת מקבלה
שמור וזכור בדיבור אחד כי השמיענו אל המיוחד אדוני אחד ושמו אחד לשם ותפארת ולתהילה לך דודי לקראת כלה
פני שבת מקבלה
Page 138,
לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת מקבלה
Verse 2 לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה כי היא מקור הברכה מראש מקדם נסוכה סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה לך דודי
לקראת כלה פני שבת מקבלה לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת מקבלה התעוררי התעוררי כי בעורך קומי אורי 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 שיר דברי כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת מקבלה לך דודי לקראת כלה please rise שבת מקבלה
בואי ושלום עטרת בלט גם בשמחה ובצהלה תוך אמוני עם סגולה בואי חלה בואי חלה
לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת מקבלה לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת מקבלה 146 we remain standing
ברכו את אדוני המבורך
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
Reflections on spring. So we're trying to bring a little bit more of the warmth and the beauty of spring. If we can't have it in the air, then we've got to bring it into the sanctuary with the heart. Sunday night, we will welcome the central month of spring, which is called Iyar. So Rosh Chodesh Iyar, the first of the month of Iyar, begins with the setting of the sun on Sunday. Now, Iyar is a really interesting name for a month. It comes from an old Akkadian word that's an ancient Semitic language that means a rosette or a blossom. It's the 8th month in the Jewish civil year or the 2nd month in the Jewish agricultural year. Pesach, which we observed just a few weeks ago, is in the 1st agricultural month of the year. Usually falls in late April or in this case, the very beginning of May. Along with all other current biblical and post-biblical names for months, Iyar is a name that's not Hebrew. As I've said, it comes from the way in which the Jewish people named the times of the year while in captivity in Babylonia. In Babylonia, the name for the month was Ara'aru, which is also of the meaning a month of blossoming. And so we too pray that the month of Iyar will release us from the captivity of winter, the captivity of pandemic living, the captivity of isolation and depression and anxiety and emotional regression and everything else that has been keeping us from being our fullest, most fully blossomed selves. Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim. We bless the name of the one who changes times and opens new seasons. Amen. 150.
אהבת עולם בית ישראל עמך אהבת תורה ומצוות חוקים ומשפטים אותנו לימדת כי הם חיינו לאורך ימינו ובהם נגה יומם ולילה ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. אוהב עמו ישראל. אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד.
154.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Often what the Torah tells us stretches credulity, stretches and strains the imagination. For instance, what the Torah tells us about the size of the crowd that went free from Egyptian bondage to the wilderness. The Torah tells us that it was 600,000 people, and that's just men of fighting age, not including the women and children. So I've read that statistic countless times, and I've said, how could the Torah even visualize what 600,000 people fleeing Egyptian bondage must have looked like? How could 600,000 people have crossed the Red Sea at a narrow border crossing and entered a wilderness and still remain as one community, identifiable in their identity? And then I went to Poland last month, and I visited all along the border refugees pouring in from war-torn Ukraine. At the time that I was there, 150 refugees on average were entering just Poland every minute. There were at the time about 1.5 million refugees in Poland. Today that number is well over 4 million. There are millions and millions more internally displaced and now scattered throughout the borderlands of Ukraine. So the Torah may not actually stretch credulity because we see time and again that the plight of refugees is one that history continues to play out. Picture them as we sing Micha Mocha, our people's song of going forth from bondage to the wilderness.
כיפד אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
Amen. 160.
השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך.
164. Please rise.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agid tehilatecha Adonai open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei Hakol V'Zocher Chastei Avot V'Imahot U'Mevii Geula Livnei V'neihem Le'ma'an Shemo Be'ahava Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham V'Ezrat Sarah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechayei HaKol Atah Rav Lehoshia Morid Hatal Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed Mechayei HaKol Berachamim Rabim Somech Noflim V'Rofech Olim U'Matir Asurim ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
Prayer doesn't happen just because you said the words on the page in the right way. Prayer happens whenever something inside of you opens up to the beauty or mystery of the world, opens up to the feelings that have been either weighing you down or lifting you up over the last week. Like a bud in spring, take a moment to let a prayer open up within you. If it's your custom to remain standing for your prayers, you may, or you may choose to take your seats at this time. We'll know it's time to move on in our service when everyone is seated.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום. הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, יעשה שלום עלינו, עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, יעשה שלום עלינו, ועל כל, ועל כל, ועל כל ישראל, ועל כל יושבי תבל, ואמרו אמן, ואמרו אמן. We ask for peace on earth, and we say ואמרו אמן, ואמרו אמן. We raise our voice as one, and we say amen.
I'm just going to lower the screen so that my visuals will show up. I'll be right with you. Here we go. Let there be screen. There it is. Yes, indeed. Let's just hope that the very cheeky image comes up right away. Let's see. Sanyo, it says. You'll see. Welcome, Shabbat Shalom. I'll set the stage for us. Tonight, my Devar Torah, or sermonette, is going to be told through pictures with a little bit of text as well that we can study and contemplate as a congregation. This week, we're reading from a Torah portion called Acharemot. It begins in the 16th chapter, there we go, the 16th chapter of the book of Leviticus. So really the heart of the Torah. You open up the Torah at this time of year and you'll see there's equal amounts of parchment on the right and on the left sides. You're right in the middle. And Acharemot is a Torah portion that gets into a whole lot of detail around the way in which the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, was observed in Bible times. Not like the way it is observed today. And Yom Kippur today is a day of fasting and penitence and healing broken relationships and addressing the soul and doing kind of the work, the spiritual work, to clear ourselves for the year to come. And then by the end of a very exhausting day of no food or drink or any kind of bodily pleasure, we take a deep breath and we know that in the eyes of God, and if we've done the work in our relationship, in the eyes of our fellow human beings, we are ready to enter a new year with a clean slate. Well, biblical people had the same basic human yearning to get rid of sin, to find a way to clear themselves of wrongdoing. But the way in which this week's Torah portion describes the ritual process for getting that spiritual work done could not be more different than the way Yom Kippur is observed today. To wit, yes, the scapegoat, then and now. Why are we talking about scapegoats? Because of this. This line from, hello? Oh, don't do this on me. All right, I'll just have to stand here and like push buttons on my computer. Hello. All right, so this is a line from chapter 16 of the book of Leviticus, this week's Torah reading. Aaron shall place both his hands upon the head of the live goat. There are two goats involved in this ritual. One gets dead. One is sacrificed right away. I skipped over that part. It's very bloody. Head of the live goat, and confess over it all the Israelites' wrongdoings and their transgressions, all their sins, putting them, meaning all of the bad stuff that the entire Jewish community had done in the last year, onto the head of the goat. And he shall send it off into the wilderness by way of a designated agent. It's like, Shmuel, go take the goat and lead him away from the community into the wilderness. Thus the goat shall carry upon itself all their wrongdoings to an inaccessible region, and the goat shall be sent off in the wilderness. And the rabbis debated, well, what happened to the goat? And almost all of the rabbis in the ancient rabbinic community agreed, no one cares, we never saw the goat again. The presumption is the goat would die. Maybe he would die of starvation or thirst. Maybe the goat would fall off a cliff, never to be seen again is the point. And it was a really bad omen if the goat came back, because that goat has now been, transferred, has received all of the sins of the Israelite community. This is a strange ritual, but I'm not making this up. This is really in the Torah. And there's a detail from a stained glass window at the Lincoln Cathedral in Lincoln, England. In the east window, you can see this incredibly detailed rendering of exactly the ritual that the book of Leviticus describes. Here we have in the center the high priest, the one with the kind of turban, the white turban on his head and the linen robes, and he's casting lots with dice, what appear to be dice, which is probably the artist's rendering of the priest's oracular devices known as Urim v'Tumim. Nobody exactly knows what these are, but the Torah describes that as part of the ritual dress of the high priest, he had these devices for making important decisions. And then you see there's Shmuel with the goat, he's the designated agent, and I don't know who the poor Shmo is in the background looking at this, but he must just be a representative Israelite. He's kind of crouched over, he feels guilty about his sins, he can't wait to get rid of the goat into the wilderness because he knows that goat is going to carry off all of his bad deeds from the last year. And here we actually have two goats. They're side by side, which is why they have 8 legs, and one of them is going to be sacrificed, the other becomes this, the scapegoat. A word that was coined in the English language in 1530 by a fellow named Tyndale. Tyndale was a Protestant minister and linguist who particularly was interested in a long project of coming up with the meaning of biblical words. And so he was familiar with Hebrew, but he also rendered into English many words that have actually passed down to us as common parlance, including this one, a scapegoat. That is to say, a goat sent into the wilderness on the Day of Atonement as a symbolic bearer of the sins of the people, from scape, which is just a short form of to escape, plus goat. The whole word translating into Latin as caper emissarius, which itself is a translation in the Vulgate, the ancient Latin tongue, of the Hebrew Azazel. The Torah in this passage describes the goat that is sent off as the goat for Azazel. And nobody knows exactly what Azazel means. There's a rabbinic read on Azazel that it's actually a kind of play on the words Ez Ozel, which means the goat that departs, but which others hold to be the proper name of a devil or demon in Jewish mythology, sometimes identified with the Canaanite deity Aziz. And even today in modern Hebrew, if you want to say a kind of mild swear to people, you say Lech la'Azazel, which means go to where all the bad people go. Go. It's mildly inappropriate for Friday night at shul. Okay, Lech la'Azazel. That's how you say it in Hebrew. If you have a cabbie who tries to rip you off, say to the cabbie Lech la'Azazel. He'll know exactly what you mean. Okay. So that's scapegoat. We've had it in the English language for almost 500 years. Now, scapegoating is familiar to us as a Jewish people and as a Jewish community because perhaps more than any other community in all of history, certainly Western history, Jews have been the scapegoat at the hands of others. So this is a very disturbing image of what is known as the blood libel or the ritual murder accusation. Starting in the 11th or 12th centuries in England and spreading throughout all of Western Europe, and by the 20th century even in Russia, and today in many parts of the Arab Middle East, the accusation lives on that Jews kill non-Jewish children and use their blood for ritual purposes, such as the making of Passover matzah. If it strains credulity, I understand and I sympathize with you. Nevertheless, this charge alone has led to countless Jewish lives being endangered and taken. In fact, throughout medieval Europe, if, for instance, a poor Christian boy or girl were turned up dead, there's a famous case of a young boy named William of Norwich in 1194 in England. He turns up dead in a well. And the Jewish community is rounded up en masse. They are accused of using William of Norwich's blood to make Passover matzah, and they are burned by the dozens at the stake. You have other examples throughout Jewish history where even without a body, a little non-Jewish boy or girl goes missing. Jews are rounded up, accused of ritual murder, accused of the blood libel, and burned at the stake. Many Jews were expelled from their countries that they had called home because of this charge, because they were scapegoated every time a non-Jewish boy or girl turned up dead or missing. Ritual murder. And so I'm not going to get into the details of the image. It speaks for itself. But we are not the only people in history to endure scapegoating. I'll show you one other powerful image. This may be a little bit more familiar. This is Nazi propaganda. And I'll translate some of the German. Well, I've already done it. Nazi propaganda scapegoating der Jude, the Jew. And what you have an image of here is fists raised in defiance, the proud German people. And then you can see that a hand is pulling back the curtain to reveal a war-torn landscape, right? Fires burning in the background on the horizon. And then this very menacing, bloated face with heavy-set eyebrows and a prominent hooked nose. And what it says here is, der Jude, the Jew, Kriegsanstifter, which means a war instigator, Kriegsverlängerer, a warmonger. So in the midst of World War II, and this is unbelievable knowing what we know about who was actually responsible for World War II, Jews were being blamed for fomenting the war. This is just one of countless examples of Nazi propaganda that scapegoated Jews for the problems of Germany, going back well before World War II. But as I've said, Jews are not the only scapegoats in history. What you're looking at, I won't read it, but what you're looking at on the left is an actual photo of Executive Order 9066, which was issued by President Franklin Roosevelt on February 19, 1942, and which authorized the evacuation of all persons deemed to be a threat to national security from the West Coast to relocation centers further inland. And this basically, although the text is very wiggly, and it doesn't specifically say take all the Japanese Americans and intern them in camps, that's exactly what happened. This was the executive order that authorized the powers that be to use whatever they had at their discretion to relocate Japanese Americans to the infamous internment camp. And over the next half a year, more than 100,000 men, women, and children of Japanese ancestry who were Americans were relocated to these relocation centers that came to be known as internment camps because they were being scapegoated for the role of Japan in the war, and they were deemed as suspicious, possible. In the first line of this, it references espionage, so maybe they were spies. That was what was being scapegoated on the Japanese Americans. The image here. This shows fathers with their children on their shoulders. These are Syrian refugees. This picture was taken in Germany in 2015. But I reference in the caption here what happened on November 13th, 2015, which I'll never forget. It was a Friday night, and I remember learning this as soon as I came off the bima, what had happened in coordinated attacks all around Paris, most infamously at the Bataclan concert hall, where over 130 were killed and another 351 injured, many of them grievously injured. The mastermind of the attacks was actually killed in a police raid within, I think, a day or so of the Paris attacks. His name was Abdelhamid Abaoud. He was a 28-year-old Belgian national. His father happens to have been an immigrant from Morocco. But this was, I believe, the signature event in the unfolding massive Syrian refugee crisis that led to many countries in the West, Paris, Germany, Hungary, many Central European countries, and the United States of America, scapegoating variously refugees, Muslims, Syrians, people of Middle Eastern descent, for all of the problems, economic, political, military, what have you, that many of these countries were facing. Not long after, an American candidate for president would begin talking about the threat from Muslim countries and would eventually, in his first week in office, impose a ban on people from Muslim majority countries. Scapegoating. So let's not only put this on enemies of the Jewish people. Now, this image was taken in 2014, just so you understand how long this has been going on. This was a photograph taken in far eastern Ukraine, all around the areas that are most under siege right now. This picture actually was taken in Crimea, which was annexed by Russia. But it pertains to an election coming up in Ukraine where Russians plastered eastern Ukraine with propaganda posters like this that propose that you have a choice in the upcoming election. You can vote to keep or make Ukraine, like on the left, a country of Nazism and barbed wire, or on the right, blue sky, the colors of the Russian flag. Right, so this is how Russians have been using Ukraine as a scapegoat for 8 years before they massed on Ukraine's border over the past 6 months and eventually invaded on February 24th, just a little over 2 months ago. You must understand that one of the reasons that many Russians actually believe that the war is for a good cause is because of the scapegoating of Ukraine that didn't just start a few months ago. Russia has been scapegoating Ukraine as a Nazi invader country for at least 8 years, if not more. And this image is but one potent example. And we know the result when you scapegoat a country like this. You end up with people who must leave. Time and again, the scapegoat has been cast out like the original goat for Azazel into the wilderness. This is what you get when you scapegoat people. You get an image that was taken just last week in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. So as I said, I had the opportunity under the sponsorship of UJA Federation of New York to travel to Poland to meet with Ukrainian refugees in the middle of March and to hear their stories, to bear witness to their trauma, to bring a message of hope and help, to bring lots of humanitarian supplies, thousands of pounds of humanitarian supplies, mostly medical relief supplies, and to come back to Westchester Reform Temple with a commitment that their stories will continue to be told and that their voices matter and will not be silenced. So here we are, our group of rabbis, with just a small portion of the bags of medical supplies that we brought. And the first stop we made was to the JCC of Warsaw. What I want to emphasize here is that every single organization we visited, as well as every ordinary Polish citizen's home, is now open to help refugees. Everywhere you go in this country, there is not a free bed, there is not a hotel with availability, there is not an apartment building, an Airbnb, a community center, a civic location that is not hosting and helping refugees. We met, for instance, with a company that up until a few months ago was providing Holocaust education by taking teenagers in Poland and driving them around to visit the extermination camps. This past week, by the way, was Yom HaShoah, the day of remembering the Holocaust. And, by the way, the full name of the holiday is also Remembering Deeds of Heroism. So I want to single out the heroism of those Holocaust educators that decided if they're not using their tour buses to educate youth about the Holocaust, they're going to use their tour buses to bring refugees away from the dangers of the border to safer locations within Poland, and from there, perhaps to new lives in Europe. These refugees we met at the lobby of the Warsaw Novotel. These are Ukrainian Jewish refugees, though we met plenty of refugees who are not Jewish. Ukrainian Jews before the war comprised over 200,000 people in Ukraine. Now they are dispersed, and several thousand have already made Aliyah. They have been processed under the law of return to be repatriated to Israel, which is the reason Israel exists, to be the place where a Jewish refugee will always be able to come home. On the last day of our trip, you see us now sending off these same Jewish refugees with little Israeli flags that the woman with the blonde hair and the plaid blanket and her daughter and son are waving an Israeli flag. They don't speak a word of Hebrew. They don't speak a word of Polish. They spoke to us in Russian through an interpreter. But they are now living in Israel. And this man is among them. This is a 95-year-old survivor of the war. He was living by himself in an apartment in Kyiv. 2 months before the war broke out, his son and grandkids left Ukraine to make Aliyah to Israel. They saw the troops massing on the border. They said, "We're out of here." And with the help of the Jewish Agency for Israel, they left, and now they live in Israel. But when the war broke out, the son was very worried about his very old father, who did not want to leave even though he saw the signs coming. His father said, "What are you talking about? Kyiv is my home. I don't speak Hebrew. I don't want to move to Israel. I'm 95. But when war broke out, things changed. His son made an incredibly dangerous and daring journey back through Kazakhstan into Ukraine, extricated his dad from Kyiv while under bombardment, took 3 days standing in sub-freezing temperatures to cross the border from Ukraine over to Poland, watching several other people more infirm than this gentleman die of hypothermia and other medical infirmities. And we met him and heard his story. Many people said, was it just sheer panic? No. It was this face, the face of a person who's been hollowed out by the trauma of war, absolutely bone exhausted, and yet has nowhere else to go, like the scapegoat cast into the wilderness. He now lives in Israel with his family. Here are a couple more heroes. The mayor of Chichanov, receiving some of our supplies on the left, and an American who made Aliyah to Israel over 20 years ago named Mike Atkinson, who's the board member and an emergency medical technician for an Israeli disaster relief organization called Natan, and he claims to be Rick Jacobs' second cousin, by the way, Rabbi Rick Jacobs. This gentleman has now devoted 2 months of his life to helping refugees. He flew to Poland at the beginning of the war and just returned back to Israel. He gave us each an orange vest so that we could go into a refugee processing center here, which used to be a shopping center very much like the Cross County Mall. Only now imagine that the halls are clear, but every storefront has been completely emptied out to be replaced with cots. The top image is of free food being distributed to refugees. The bottom image of that shopping center, which is now a refugee processing center. In one storefront, you might find medical assistance, in another one, legal counsel, another one, psychological trauma counseling, and another one, you might find people who are just charging their phones trying to reach loved ones, discovering anywhere they might be able to go. If you're watching the nightly news, you've seen this train station. You've seen what happens to history's scapegoats. They end up massing in the train station in Przemysl, Poland. Yes, Przemysl, P-R-Z-E-M-Y-S-L, pronounced Przemysl. One of the things I learned on my trip is how to speak just a couple words of Polish. And you see that it is just not 1 square inch that is not occupied by a human being who once had a home. Along the border, makeshift kiosks in a makeshift camp. You notice in the lower left, one of the first flags you see if you cross over from Ukraine into Poland on foot at this border crossing, the first thing you see is the flag of Israel. That's the border. I'll tell you more about why you see the flag of Israel, but on the other side of that fence is Ukraine. In the background, right here, a family of refugees crossing on foot. Let's get a different look. If you turn around from this spot, you're facing the flag of Israel again. That's a medical relief tent. The very first people that refugees crossing over at this place in Westchester, Poland meet are Israeli medical technicians, doctors, and nurses. They're able to go into this tent and receive first aid or other medications and supplies. Like this woman. Sorry, that's our group. We haven't moved, by the way. I'm just doing a 360. We're in the exact same location for all of these pictures. This woman, whose toddler is being held by Polish military, we watched her walk over on foot. This picture was taken 5 minutes earlier, so there she is with her family. I had more luggage for 3 days of travel than this refugee family had for the rest of their lives. Everything they have with them, they could carry. This gentleman is a volunteer with the Joint Distribution Committee, another Jewish organization positioned on the ground. Okay. The last thing I want to share with you. This is really just a walkthrough of what happens to history's scapegoats, but this is only the beginning of their journey. The question is, what will we as Jews, as a Jewish community, do in an ongoing and supportive way to make sure that their journey has a redemptive ending? So I'll share with you one possible redemptive image. You won't be able to make out much of the sound, but I'll play it anyway. This was our connecting flight on the way home from Warsaw through Amsterdam. The pilot comes into the cabin to explain to the passengers with an apology that we've been delayed for 45 minutes taking off. And I just want you to notice what happens, because most of the time when there's a delay, the cabin doesn't respond this way.
Matter. It's good to have all these Ukrainian refugees on board with the able to help.
All right, we're all applauding because what the captain just said was, thank you for your patience. We have a number of Ukrainian refugees on board, and it took us longer than expected to process all of their paperwork. So now these people live in Amsterdam, in Berlin, in the UK, in France, and from there, who knows where their next homes will be. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and thank you for the ongoing commitment to make sure that when we as a Jewish people say never again, we understand that that's not a guaranteed outcome in this world. It's something we have to work and work and work to achieve. Shabbat Shalom. Heart at this time thoughts of loved ones who are in spiritual exile or exile from health, people who yearn to be whole in body and in spirit. If you know somebody who is sick or who now is in pain or simply wishes they could be part of our in-person congregation tonight but can't because they're immunocompromised and don't want to be out in public, hold them in your heart. And if you'd like to say anyone's name out loud for this prayer of healing, you can stand and say their names when I make eye contact with you. You don't have to stand, Frank. I can see you. Thank you. We had the names Rachel Rackhauer, Jennifer Leventhal, Roberta Friedman, Linda Feldman, Jeff Millman, Avram Feivel ben Michel, Herschel ben Sarah, Esther Bat Mechel Varezel, Rachel Bracha, Judy Weiss, Steve Grodzinski, Sarah Horan, Grace Neidish, Avram ben Miriam, Yitzchak Halevi ben Sholem, Elizabeth Hartz, Matana Batadina, Barbara Feldman, Tony and Gina DeLappa, Matthew Atwood, Gloria Byron, Anthony and Elizabeth Dankner, Deborah Kapnick, Nicole Shusi, Neil Glasgow, Leah Greenspan, Andrea Reiner, Masha Batsora, Aviva Tzila bat Esther Bela, Andrew Goldstein, Ken Master, Chava bat Sarah, Eliyahu Chaim ben Fredel, Sheila Fried, Malka Tzipora bas Rachel, Tamar bat Malka, Heschel Meir ben Davida Chana, and Reuven Avram ben Mordechai Va'ada, and all the names that we're also pronouncing quietly. If you want to follow in our prayer of healing, the words are on 371.
And let us say, bless those in need of healing with refuah shema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say amen.
We rise for our concluding prayers, beginning with Aleinu, page 586.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. As Rabbi Blake mentioned, this week we observed Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so we will hear this evening a musical meditation before Kaddish in honor of that observance, a piece called Shifrele's Portrait. Here's a translation of the Yiddish. On the wall over my bed hangs the portrait of my daughter, Shifrele. Often in the middle of the night when I'm lonesome for her, I see that she is looking at me. I hear her talking to me. Father, I know it pains you. The war will not last long. I'll come to you soon. Spring is already knocking at the door. Lovingly, it talks to me. Shifrele's Portrait. Auf der Wand links von mein Bett hängt mein Tochter Shifrele's Portrait. ist dir bang, wird der Krieg schon nicht gedoi erlang. Kommen will ich bald zu dir, es klappt der Frühling schon in dir. Kommen will ich bald zu dir, es klappt der Frühling schon in dir. Schmeichelt lieb zu mir unret, schiefer alles Portrait.
We'd like to recognize and bring comfort to the mourners in our community. If you have laid to rest a loved one within the last week, would you please rise? Those who are within the first 30 days of remembrance for a loved one, please rise. And if you are within a first year of mourning your loved one, would you please rise? If tonight marks a yahrzeit, the anniversary of a loved one's death, would you please rise? In sympathy, in fellowship, and in remembrance of the 6 million Jews who were murdered by the Nazis, and for the 5 million others who were taken, would you please rise as one community? This week, our WRT community remembers those who have died in the last 4 weeks: Fred Nelson, father of Nancy Kaplan; Stephen Lewis, cousin of Mark Lewis; Mark Lorinsky, husband of Helene Lorinsky and father of Scott Lorinsky and Robin Stammen; and Paul Rittmaster, father of Peter Rittmaster, as well as those whose yahrzeit are commemorated this Shabbat: Faye Berman, Barbara Belsey, Joseph Bender, Michael Bergman, Erwin Bernstein, Samson Broadwin, Larry Buxbaum, Philip Dworetsky, Ben Edelman, Bessie Eisert, Harry Fields, Martin Fife, Maurice Friedman, Mary Kaplan Geller, Joshua Gendel, Harry Ginsberg, Nathan Glickman, Philip Goldenberg, Dorothy Goldstein, Michael Greenberg, Cecily Gutter, Jesse Hennig, David Jaffe, Sarah Kaufman, Carl Nispel, Pearl Koch, Mildred Lakow, Martha Lawner, Harry Levin, Rosalie Siegel, Joan Messinger, Marvin Meth, Milton Munitz, Ethel Michelson, Ann R. Miller, Ruth Reynolds, Rita Roseman, Selmore Rubinoff, Samuel Ruboy, Harry Shapiro, Ruth Shapiro, Donald Sharoff, Shepard Shapiro, Jack Young, Irving Simon, Kenneth Sipser, Rose Smith, Miriam Spitalny, Bernard Chorney, Sylvia Weberman, Harry Weinstein, and Morris Weitz. If you have additional names to commemorate, or if I've inadvertently mispronounced a loved one's name, would you kindly offer your names at this time? Ti zichronam baruch. May their memory be a blessing and continue to perpetuate goodness in the world. We offer the Mourner's Kaddish on page 598. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, bi'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, b'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'olam alamei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei d'kudasha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, Tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalom araba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav v'yasei shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Osei shalom b'mromav Hu yaseh shalom עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן.
Good evening. Just some brief comments. First and foremost, we wanted to once again congratulate Hannah Stockton and the entire Stockton family for your mitzvah tomorrow morning, as well as the Klein family tomorrow afternoon, I believe. Zachary Klein and his entire family are also celebrating a mitzvah, Mazel Tov. Some quick announcements. Tomorrow morning, as usual, we've got Torah study and sharing Shabbat at 9 a.m. Torah will be via Zoom. We have the annual Men's Men of Reform Judaism retreat on Saturday at 12:30. Also on Saturday at 8 p.m., we have a Legacy of Life, sharing stories and song. Through May 1st through 7th, we have small group discussions. If you haven't signed up yet, please look for those. That's an opportunity to really provide feedback to leadership in terms of the current temple as well as the future direction. We have a wonderful opportunity with the JNF entitled Water, Wine, and Whiskey, featuring Chef Lior Lev Surkaz on Thursday night at 7 p.m. That's Thursday, May 12th. And last, but certainly not least, on Friday, May 20th through Sunday, May 22nd, please note that we have a tribute weekend for our outgoing rabbis, Levi and Reeser. Last but not least, I wanted to thank our greeter, Donna Rabin, our wonderful clergy, for leading services, as well as our terrific musicians. Thank you so much. Sharon Shabbat Shalom. Sorry.
I love that you said sharing Shabbat.
Shabbat
That made
Shalom,
me
everyone.
happy.
Mazel Tov again to you. Hannah, really looking forward to celebrating with you and in you tomorrow morning, and your family. I think we've got a big crowd here for Hannah, and welcome to Westchester Reform Temple, and Mazel Tov to all of you. Cantor, shall we conclude our service?
We shall, with a third Osei Shalom, I just realized.
There's a
But
lot
we
of
need,
Osei Shalom
we need
today.
lots of prayers for peace these days.
We
So
certainly do.
feels
May they be
appropriate.
heard and answered. Will the congregation please rise?
Osei Shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Baruch atah Adonai,
I didn't know if you wanted
Eloheinu
to announce
melech
a page.
haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu, zikaron le'maaseh v'reishit, ki hu yom tchila l'mikra'ei kodesh, zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim. Kivanu v'acharta, ve'otanu kidashta, mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha, be'ahava uvratzon, hinchaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh Kodesh HaShabbat.
L'chaim. You could just strip it.
Please join us.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Like I've seen a lot of all these people. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Have you been to the ball before? Yeah, I went when Bill was out. Oh, really? Not here. You know, project. They definitely made it happen. Really good. It was a good job with the studio. Yeah, why not? They said they were going to have the sides and then they brought Horace in, which is like, we almost walked this week and not the college. I was definitely, I told Kelly, I said, this is not, what is it? I kept looking for my own, I only wanted to take a mask with it, and in fact, I said to John Mark, I didn't bring it up, I said, you know, he's like, yeah, but it's I'll be in the city, so it was not. I have to take a few tests coming up because I have a wedding. Right. Is that what right? Many of them require the test that just knows for weddings. Right. When I tested, I see the wiring. It's unnecessary.